The lawyer cleared his throat at the back of the venue just as my daughter walked down the aisle, without me in the guest list. Still, I didn't move from my car, just listened through the speakerphone, hands folded like I was the one being given away. As his voice echoed through the mic, that calm, trained tone began to split the room like a blade. While the guests shifted in their seats, I remembered the day she told me I wouldn't fit the image of her new life. The same daughter I raised in love was now marrying into wealth on land I still legally owned. That's when he read the clause, and silence hit harder than applause ever could. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I first heard the wedding date the same way I hear about every other piece of town gossip, over a grocery aisle between canned tomatoes and the bakery display. Margaret, did you hear? Rachel's getting married in October, such a beautiful venue up in the mountains. I smiled because it was easier than telling the truth. Oh, October already, time flies. My hands didn't shake, at least not enough for the woman in front of me to notice. After she rolled her cart away, I stood there for a moment, staring at a row of paper towels as if they could anchor me. When I got home, I waited until Rachel's usual break between meetings, then called. She answered on the first ring, cheerful, too cheerful. Mom, hey, everything okay? I heard something today about a date being set. My voice was light, practiced. Is the wedding happening sooner than you planned? There was a tiny pause, small but sharp enough to cut. Oh, that, yeah, we're keeping it super small. Honestly, barely anyone's coming. Something inside me folded quietly, like cloth being put away for the season. I see, well, congratulations. She rushed to fill the silence. It's just complicated with Grant's family, very private people, and we don't want pressure on the guest list. Pressure, as if my presence was a burden to be managed. I told her I understood. I always told her I understood. It had become our pattern. She offered excuses, I offered grace. She didn't realize grace can run out. A week later, I was making tea when my phone buzzed with notifications. Bates' account, posting pictures from a bridal shower. 20 women seated around a long farmhouse table, floral arch behind them, champagne flutes raised. My daughter stood in the center, glowing. And next to her, Bate, my own sister, smiling like she belonged more than I did. There wasn't a single empty chair in those photos, not one. I set the phone down slowly, the way you might set down something delicate, not broken, just no longer yours. The kettle whistled behind me. I poured the water, watched the steam lift, and let the quiet settle in my kitchen. Then, without any rush or anger, I walked to the drawer beside my desk. The one I swore I'd organize someday. I pulled it open and lifted out the old accordion folder my husband, Daniel, used to call our real insurance. Inside were decades of our life, deeds, birth certificates, trust documents, the original title to the house he built with his own hands. Things Rachel never asked about because she assumed, rightly, that someday they'd be hers. I carried the folder to the dining table and laid out each document as if preparing for some slow, methodical ceremony. Land title. Inheritance files. Marriage license. Daniel's life insurance settlement. The early paperwork for the family trust we built together. I traced Daniel's signature with my finger. He'd always said, "Take care of what matters, Maggie, don't let anyone make you small." I had let myself become small for too long. The clock chimed 7, I made dinner for one, plated it neatly out of habit, and checked my phone once more. No call, no text, no update. Grant didn't reach out either. I didn't expect him to, but the silence still sat heavy. Outside, the sky had gone that soft blue that comes before the mountains swallow the sun. I stood at the window, watching the last light fade. I told myself I wasn't hurt, just corrected. Like life was quietly adjusting something I'd mistaken for stable. When I finally closed the folder, I felt a steadiness I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. This wasn't about punishment, not yet. It was about clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is its own kind of invitation. One Rachel had chosen not to send. I turned off the lights and went upstairs, leaving the folder open on the table, documents spread out like pieces of a puzzle I suddenly knew how to solve. As I reached the bedroom door, my phone buzzed once. A single notification. From someone I hadn't expected at all. I stared at the screen, breath caught. And everything in me shifted. The notification from the night before still sat unopened on my phone when I left the house the next morning. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it would say or what it wouldn't. Downtown Asheville was waking up slow, the way mountain towns do, with sunlight catching on shop windows and the faint smell of roasted coffee drifting from the corner cafe. I took the long route on purpose, letting my feet choose the path instead of my thoughts. When I reached the boutique, I stopped without meaning to. The same place Rachel used to press her face against at 13, sighing over the white satin gowns displayed on faceless mannequins. "One day, Mama," she used to whisper, tugging my sleeve, "I'm going to walk down an aisle wearing something just like that." The gown in the window now was elegant, pearled bodice, long train, exactly the kind she used to dream about. I felt the memory push up like a bruise. But I didn't step closer. Didn't linger. I just nodded once to the ghost of that little girl and kept walking. Lauren's office sat above a small accounting firm tucked between a bakery and a quilting shop. The kind of place no one would look twice at, which was exactly why I chose her years ago. Reliable, quiet, sharp. She looked up as I entered, reading my expression immediately. "Margaret." Her tone softened, but she didn't pity me. That was one of the things I valued most about her. "You have the folders." I handed her both. Estate revision and statement of intent. My handwriting was steady, my grip was not. Lauren opened the first folder with the clinical precision of someone who knew these choices weren't made on impulse. "You're certain about the removal?" "I am." No explanation, no wavering. She accepted the answer without pressing for more. We moved through the paperwork slowly, methodically, line by line, clause by clause. Rachel's name crossed out, replaced with contingencies that reflected what she had already chosen with her silence. Lauren slid a fresh page toward me. "This is the addendum, a letter of clarification. It's only to be opened if certain thresholds are met." We both knew what those thresholds were. I read the letter once quietly. There was no malice in it, no anger, just the truth, a truth I had avoided naming aloud. When I picked up the pen to sign the revision itself, my hand felt strangely light, as if the weight I'd been carrying had finally shifted somewhere else. No trembling. No hesitation. Just ink drying on paper. Lauren gathered the documents into a neat stack, then paused. "There's one more thing." I reached into my purse and placed the sealed envelope on her desk. Thick ivory paper, my full name written across the front in careful script. "Deliver only if I'm excluded from the official invitation," I said, my voice steady. Lauren studied me for a long moment. "Margaret, you understand that once this is set in motion, there's no way to undo its effect, not with apologies, not with regrets." "I know. And you're prepared for whatever fallout comes." I thought of the bridal shower photos. Of Bates smiling like she'd earned a place that belonged to me. Of Rachel's voice, slipping excuses between breaths, treating me like an afterthought she was tired of managing. Of Daniel's signature on the documents waiting for me at home. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." Lauren slid the envelope into her locked drawer. "Then we proceed." When I stepped back onto the street, the church bells downtown were ringing noon. Couples passed me, laughing, arms linked. Someone carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Life kept moving, indifferent to mine. And still I felt strangely anchored. I walked toward home, letting the hum of traffic fade behind me. The folder in my bag felt heavier now, not in burden, but in consequence. Halfway down the block, my phone vibrated. A message this time. From Rachel. Just 2 words. Not an apology. Not an invitation. I froze on the sidewalk as I read them. And everything I'd prepared myself for suddenly felt insufficient. Rachel's 2-word message, "venue secured," sat in my notifications like a stone I refused to pick up. She didn't mention where. Didn't mention who was invited. Just assumed I would understand my place. I waited until evening when the house was quiet and the light dipped low against the living room walls before I opened my laptop. If she wasn't going to tell me, the internet would. Asheville wasn't large enough to hide a luxury wedding for long. It took 3 clicks. A headline on a local lifestyle page. Holly's Collins wedding to be held at Elkwood Ridge Mountain Estate. I had driven by Elkwood Ridge once. Pine-lined driveway, private ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, a sweeping terrace overlooking the valley. Weddings there usually made the society pages. And apparently this one would too. An entire section already teased the arrival of distinguished guests from the Holly's family network. Distinguished. Important. Worthy of a seat. My chest tightened, but not with heartbreak this time. Anything quieter, more instructive. I clicked through the venue's upcoming events, each tagged with expected guest lists. Grant's extended relatives were mentioned by name, many recognizable from business articles and philanthropic boards. I even found a registry page with arrivals scheduled from New York, Chicago, and Santa Barbara. So barely anyone coming, she had said. A small ceremony. Almost no guests. The lie didn't surprise me. The ease of it did. A soft knock broke the silence. Jamie from next door, tall and earnest, carrying a toolbox. Cabin pipes rattling again, he said. Mind if I check the meter? I let him in through the side gate. Jamie had been part of this property since he was 10, trailing behind his mother while she gardened with me. Now 26 and a nurse himself, he still treated the place like home. He glanced at my expression. Everything okay, Miss Collins? I almost said yes, the polite lie I'd learned to default to, but something in me resisted. I might be away for a few days next month, I said instead. If you need space to study or clear your head, you can use the cabin, keys in the usual place. His face lit up, grateful. He didn't ask why I'd be gone, and I didn't offer the reason. Some things weren't meant to be spoken yet, not even to good-hearted boys who still looked at me like I mattered. After he left, I sat at the dining table, the same place Daniel and I used to balance checkbooks and sign school permission slips. The folder with the estate documents was still there, a quiet reminder of the path I'd already stepped onto. I reached for my journal, a leather one Daniel bought me on our 20th anniversary. I hadn't written in it for years, but now the words came easily. If they choose to erase me, then I will choose where my legacy goes. Love is not an entitlement. Respect cannot be begged for. I will not be small again. The pen glided across the page, not shaky, not hesitant, just certain. My phone buzzed once. I didn't check it. I kept it on silent, like a boundary laid clean. I wrote until the room grew dim, the journal filling with truths I'd never allowed myself to admit. Outside, a breeze pushed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant rain. It felt like the mountains were exhaling for me. When I finally closed the journal, a strange calm settled over me, an acceptance that whatever was coming, I was no longer standing unprepared. I shut my laptop, turned off the dining room light, and started toward the stairs. Then from the kitchen counter, my laptop pinged. A new alert from the Elkwood Ridge event page. A name had just been added to the public guest list. A name I knew too well. A name that shouldn't have been there. I stepped closer, heart slowing, breath tightening. And when I saw who it was, the air left my lungs in one clean rush. Bates' name had no right being on that guest list. Not beside Rachel's. Not beneath the heading family of the bride. I barely slept. By morning, the house felt tight with memory, and the only place I could breathe was the cemetery. Daniel had always been the one who steadied me. His absence was still the loudest voice in the room. The grass was damp when I stepped out of the car, a thin fog curling low over the stones. His headstone sat beneath an old maple, its leaves just starting to turn gold. I set fresh flowers against the base, white lilies, his favorite, and brushed the dirt from his name. You'd laugh at this, I whispered, touching the cool granite. All of it. You'd say I was being too patient again, or not patient enough. A breeze lifted, gentle, as if he was humoring me. I'm doing what I have to, I added, for myself this time. I stayed only a few minutes, long enough to feel steadied, not long enough to crumble. From there, I drove to the church. The double doors were propped open for Thursday volunteers and the smell of furniture polish trailed into the hall. A few familiar faces called my name softly, like they weren't sure how close they were allowed to get. "Margaret, are you going to the big day?" "No." The word came out clean, not brittle. One woman, Darla, who'd lost her son 2 years ago, gave me a long, knowing look. "Sometimes love requires distance," she said, squeezing my hand. "Doesn't mean it stops being love." I nodded, but the truth was harsher. Sometimes distance is the only thing left that doesn't hurt. Lauren's office was my next stop. She didn't waste time or soften her tone, another reason I trusted her more than most. I handed over the updated will, the transfer forms, the trust adjustments. She reviewed each with deliberate care, stamping and notarizing until the final stack sat crisp and irreversible. "This is everything?" she asked quietly. "It is." I reached into my bag again, pulling out a handwritten letter. Folded once, no envelope, my script neat but unmistakably final. "It's for Rachel," I said, "but not to be delivered yet." Lauren scan. "Ed, the first line, I release you from obligation and from inheritance." Her jaw tightened. She refolded it with respect, like it was a fragile artifact. "I'll hold it until you say otherwise." I thanked her and stepped back into the afternoon light, feeling both emptied and fortified. At home, the house felt too quiet, like even the walls were waiting for something. I cooked a simple dinner, baked chicken, steamed vegetables, nothing that required thought. I set 2 plates out of habit, one at my seat, one opposite Daniel's seat. The chair stayed untouched, the plate cooling with the kind of stillness that comes from years of being both full and empty. I ate slowly, letting the silence settle in layers. Afterward, I washed the dishes, wiped the counter, dimmed the lights. Everything in its place except the part of my life that should have included my daughter. When I finally sat down at the table again, the letter for Rachel still weighed on my thoughts. Not angry, not vengeful, just the truth she had earned without realizing it. Outside, the sky darkened into a deep, dusky blue. I reached for my journal again, ready to capture what the day had carved into me. But before the pen touched the page, my phone lit up with a new message. Not from Rachel. Not from Bate. Not from anyone I expected. A name I hadn't seen in years. Someone who had no reason to contact me, unless they knew something I didn't. My hand stilled above the journal. Whatever I had braced myself for. This wasn't it. The message I'd received the night before, an unexpected name resurfacing after years of distance, echoed in the back of my mind as the wedding weekend arrived. But I didn't reply. Not yet. Some truths needed space to reveal themselves. Saturday morning came soft and bright over the mountains, sunlight pooling across my kitchen table. 10 miles away, Elkwood Ridge was already buzzing with photographers, florists, and a string quartet tuning their instruments for the Hollis Collins Union. I sat in my armchair with a book open in my lap, though I barely absorbed a line. The house was still, the clock ticking with a calm that felt almost foreign. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't grieving. I was observing. My daughter was marrying without me, and I was letting the day pass like weather. Lauren had texted early, heading to the venue, we'll update afterward. Professional, controlled, exactly the woman Daniel always said I should hire if I ever needed someone with steel under courtesy. By noon, the ceremony was underway. I imagined the rustle of designer dresses, the curated smiles, the pristine mountain backdrop framed for social media. I wondered if Rachel hesitated when she walked down the aisle, if the absence of the mother who raised her felt like a missing note in a song she'd rehearsed too many times. But I didn't let myself dwell. Regret had already had its chance with me. Instead, I turned another page, slow and deliberate, as if reclaiming the part of myself that had always waited for her to look back. She hadn't. So I'd stopped waiting. By the time the reception began, a warm breeze had drifted through the windows, carrying the faint scent of pine. I made myself tea, sat at the table, and watched steam rise like a quiet benediction. At Elkwood Ridge, the toast portion of the evening had started. Lauren told me later that the room glowed in candlelight, glasses raised, everyone ready for polished speeches and predictable sentiment. Rachel stood beside Grant, posture perfect, smile practiced, believing the day had unfolded exactly the way she curated it. Until Lauren stepped forward. She didn't wait for permission, attorneys rarely do. She placed one hand on the back of her chair, cleared her throat, and said with absolute composure, "If I may, I'd like to say a few words on behalf of someone who is not present." A ripple went through the room. Rachel's smile wilted by degrees. Grant, confused, whispered something to her. Bates stiffened, eyes narrowing with the fear of someone who knows exactly what truth is approaching. Lauren reached into her briefcase, retrieving the sealed ivory envelope I had prepared weeks earlier. The same one she had locked away in her desk, waiting for this moment, waiting for their choice to trigger mine. "My name is Lauren Price," she announced, "and I am the attorney for Margaret Collins." You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. She held the envelope at chest height, steady and unmistakable. "This is not a threat," she said calmly. "It's an update." Then a beat later. "It's final." Bates' hand flew to her mouth. Grant took a step back. Rachel whispered something sharp, a single breath of panic. Lauren continued with the kind of grace that made her formidable. She handed the envelope directly to Rachel, her voice low enough to cut without shouting. "Your mother requested that you receive this before the cake is served." Inside the envelope was the legal letter. A full removal from my estate. Citing abandonment, public exclusion, and moral cause, terminology Rachel would understand even if she refused to accept it. Lauren didn't raise her voice, didn't apologize, didn't indulge theatrics. "She sends you her best," she said, "and wishes you a peaceful marriage, but she will no longer be part of it." The ballroom fell silent, a deep, cavernous quiet that no amount of string music could soften. People stared, phones hovered, whispering began at the edges like cracks in glass. 10 miles away, I took a sip of my tea. The clock chimed softly behind me. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest pull of my own future stretching open, unshackled, unviolated mine. Then my phone buzzed on the table. Not Lauren. Not Bate. Not anyone from the wedding. It was the same name from the night before. This time with a message that made my breath stop completely. "Margaret, it's about Rachel. You need to hear this tonight." Lauren told me later that she could feel the air change before anyone spoke, like the ballroom itself was holding a breath it didn't want to release. After handing Rachel the first envelope, she didn't sit. She didn't soften. Instead, she reached once more into her briefcase and withdrew a second envelope, thicker, stamped, and unmistakably official. She held it out with the cool precision of a surgeon presenting a final cut. "Mrs. Collins asked that you receive this as well," she said. The label across the front read, "Active as of today." Not a suggestion, a declaration. Rachel's smile collapsed entirely, draining from her face as if someone had switched off a light inside her. Her fingers trembled just enough to betray her. Grant watched her, bewildered, like he'd suddenly realized he didn't know the woman standing next to him. Someone at the next table leaned forward, whispering far too loudly, "Is this real?" Bate jumped in so fast she tripped over her own voice. "It's just a misunderstanding, some mix-up, I'm sure." Lauren didn't even turn her head. "There is no misunderstanding." Her posture remained effortless, spine straight, tone level. "Margaret Collins wishes the bride and groom well," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom without the need for volume. "She also wishes never to be spoken of again." A hush rolled through the room, wide, cold, immediate. Even the string quartet stopped mid-measure. Grant's father pushed his chair back with a scrape that echoed. He motioned for Grant to step aside, jaw set like a man suddenly recalculating an investment. "You said her family was clean," he murmured under his breath. "Now there's drama." Grant's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and something sharper, betrayal maybe. He looked at Rachel as though she'd sold him damaged goods without disclosure. Rachel tried to laugh, but it came out brittle, a sound that cracked before it left her throat. "Everyone, please, let's just enjoy the night. This is nothing." She reached for Grant's arm, but he pulled slightly away just enough for people to notice. The reception, once buzzing with bright chatter, dimmed into uneasy murmurs. Conversations shrank, eyes tracked them openly. A photographer lowered his camera, unsure whether to capture the moment or pretend not to see it. Lauren waited exactly 5 seconds, long enough for the weight of her words to settle, not long enough for theatrics, then nodded politely and stepped back to her seat. Her work was done, her composure never cracked. Across the ballroom, Bate hovered near Rachel, whispering frantically, hands fluttering with the desperation of someone trying to put out a fire she helped ignite. But there was no covering this, no smoothing it over. Rachel had built her wedding on curated perfection. One envelope had split the facade, the second had shattered it. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, I sat at my kitchen table, tea cooling beside me. The message from that unexpected sender still glowed on my phone. "It's about Rachel, you need to hear this tonight." My fingers hovered above the screen. I should have opened it. I should have braced myself. But instead, I stared out the window, watching the mountains darken under the first hint of evening, unaware that the moment Lauren handed over that second envelope, something else had been set in motion. Something no document on my table could have prepared me for. Back in the ballroom, Rachel straightened, forced a smile that fooled no one, and lifted her champagne glass with a trembling hand. "Let's continue," she said weakly. But the night was already over. The moment had already passed. And my phone buzzed again. This time with a message that made my stomach drop. "Margaret, it can't wait." The second message sat unopened on my phone the entire night. Not because I didn't want to know, because I needed one last evening of quiet before my world shifted again. Whatever the sender knew about Rachel could wait until morning. So I made chamomile tea, the kind Daniel used to brew when storms rolled over the mountains, and sat by the window. Outside, the wind rattled the trees like distant applause. Inside, the house felt steady, grounded in a way I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know that 10 miles away, my name was being whispered over cocktail glasses and posted into group chats. I didn't know that a guest had recorded Lauren's statement, or that the clip had already reached a few thousand views on a local gossip page. I didn't know that, overnight, the wedding lawyer thing had become its own character in town. By the next morning, I couldn't stay in the house. The energy felt brittle, like opening that message would split something I wasn't ready to confront. So I went to the small cafe near the church, the one that still sold scones wrapped in butcher paper, and remembered Daniel's favorite table. The brunch crowd was louder than usual, not rowdy, buzzing. Strangers glanced at me, then at their phones, then back again. 2 women near the counter whispered, "Did you see the wedding video? Wild and right here in our town." I heard it was the bride's mother's lawyer. My name wasn't spoken, but I felt it flicker beneath their words like a candle in a draft. I ordered tea, sat, tried to breathe normally. Halfway through my cup, my phone rang. Bate. Her tone was already lit with accusation. "Was this about humiliating her?" she demanded, skipping hello entirely. "Margaret, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking," I said, keeping my voice even, "about protecting what I've built, not giving it to someone who erased me." Bate exhaled sharply, a sound somewhere between disbelief and guilt. She didn't argue, not directly, that was never her way. Instead she muttered, "You've started something you can't undo," and hung up before I could reply. I sat there, letting her words settle and dissolve. Bate only fought for the side that gave her attention, always had, always would. Across town, Lauren had begun receiving media requests, small local outlets, then regional ones. She texted me once, declining all, "This stays private unless you choose otherwise." I believed her. She'd already proven she could be both sword and shield. By early afternoon, the situation spilled fully into the public sphere. My neighbor sent a link to a social page titled "Asheville Affairs." Bride's wedding interrupted by attorney delivering estate notice. I didn't click it. I just turned my phone face down on the table and took another sip of tea, feeling the heat settle into my chest. I should have predicted Rachel's response. She'd always been skilled at polishing truth until it shone the way she wanted. Her social media post appeared mid-afternoon, clean white background, elegant font. "We love our family, some decisions are difficult, please respect our privacy during a time of transition." It was the kind of message crafted to make her seem gracious, wounded above the noise. It was also entirely hollow. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything, my choices, her choices, the widening gap between us, rest on my ribs. It didn't crush me, not anymore. When I opened them again, the cafe had gone quiet. A man at the next table had lowered his newspaper enough for me to see the headline. "Local wedding scandal raises questions about family rift." Inside the folded pages, I spotted a photo, blurry but unmistakable, of Lauren standing in the ballroom. My pulse tightened. Not from fear. From recognition. The narrative was shifting beyond Rachel's control and beyond mine. And as I reached for my phone, intending at last to open the unread message from the night before, a new notification slid across the screen. From the same sender. This time with only 5 words. "It's worse than you think. Lauren once told me that truth doesn't explode. It seeps quietly." I imagine that's exactly how it reached Grant. While I tried to steady myself over the message waiting on my phone, Grant was upstairs in the Elkwood Ridge bridal suite, sitting across from Rachel at a vanity lined with wilting flowers and half-melted candles. The wedding dress hung over the back of her chair like a ghost she'd already outgrown. "I didn't know you cut your mother out," he said finally. Not angry. Not accusing. Just stunned. Rachel didn't look at him. She was scrubbing mascara from beneath her eyes, movements sharp and impatient. "She doesn't belong in this life," she snapped. "Not with the people we're surrounded by now. She'd embarrass herself." Grant stared at her for a long, hollow second, as if she'd become unrecognizable in the span of an afternoon. He picked up the letter Lauren had delivered, unfolded it, and read it all the way through for the first time. This time not as a public spectacle. This time as a man facing the woman he'd just married. The wording was deliberate, clear, final. Abandonment. Public exclusion. Moral cause. No theatrics, no cruelty, just truth set in stone. When he finished reading, he looked at Rachel again, and something inside him had shifted. The polished veneer he carried everywhere, the easy confidence, the quiet pride he wore like a tailored suit, it all slipped. "You lied," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Rachel's jaw tightened. "I simplified for us." But he wasn't listening anymore. Later, he found Bate near the terrace where the last of the guests were lingering with half-drunk champagne. She lit up when she saw him, too brightly, too eagerly, until she saw the letter in his hand. "Was this orchestrated?" he asked, voice low and controlled. "Or did you let it happen?" Bate lifted her chin, the same practiced indignation she'd worn since we were children. "Margaret has always been. And difficult, she twists things, you don't understand. She's the only one acting like an adult," he cut in. Bate's mouth snapped shut. Grant walked away before she could recover, leaving her frozen beneath the fairy lights, trapped by the truth she'd helped create. When he returned to Rachel, she tried again to soothe, to spin, to twist the narrative back into something manageable. But the room had changed around her. People watched her differently now, not with envy, but with calculation, judgment, curiosity. The wedding she'd staged as a flawless performance had become a public unraveling. That night, after the last guest filtered out and the staff began clearing champagne flutes, Grant carried his overnight bag down the long hall of their honeymoon suite. Rachel followed him, pleading now, her voice raw at the edges. "Grant, we can fix this. It's blown out of proportion. People will forget." He didn't answer. He opened the door to the guest room, set his bag inside, and paused only long enough to look at her one last time. Not with anger. Not with hate. With clarity. The kind that arrives when illusions finally crack. Then he closed the door. The sound echoed through the suite like a verdict. Miles away, in my quiet kitchen, I finally opened the message I had avoided for 2 days. The words hit harder than I was ready for. "Margaret, I know why she cut you out, and it wasn't her idea." I read it twice. 3 times. my pulse thudding against my ribs. Then a second message appeared. Meet me tomorrow before Rachel finds out I told you. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but from the slow, steady clicking of pieces falling into place. If someone else had pushed Rachel to cut me out, it only confirmed what I already knew. Love can be hijacked. But legacy is sovereign. So when morning light crept through my curtains, I was already dressed, documents stacked neatly inside the leather folder Daniel once used for mortgage papers. The air outside was brisk, early autumn crisp, the kind that makes every decision feel sharper. Lauren opened her office door before I knocked fully. You're early, she said, though the corners of her mouth softened when she saw my expression. Determination can be read like weather. I'm ready, I told her. She guided me inside, her desk already arranged with the forms we'd discussed months earlier, quiet plans I'd asked her to prepare in advance, back when Hope still had a small seat at the table. Now they were no longer possibilities, they were inevitabilities. The trust transfer, she confirmed. One signature will initiate it. I sat smoothing the crease in my skirt. My hands didn't shake, not even once. The Collins family trust had been Daniel's pride, money saved from decades of careful work, scraped together from overtime shifts, frugal holidays, and the belief that stability was the highest form of love. Rachel had always assumed the trust would be hers. That entitlement had been planted so early she probably didn't even realize she was standing on soil she hadn't earned. Lauren turned the final document toward me. Before you signed the scholarship title, you wanted to finalize the wording. I took a breath that felt heavier than the ink I was about to lay down. The Daniel Collins Nursing Scholarship Fund. Perpetual. Needs-based. Reserved for students from working-class families, the kind Daniel came from, the kind I treated for 40 years in hospital rooms and community clinics. One name. One legacy. No mention of Rachel. I signed. The pen moved like a blade through silk. Lauren notarized each page, the official seal pressing into paper with a quiet, definitive authority. It's done, she said. The trust no longer passes through Rachel in any form. I felt something loosen in my chest, not pride, not triumph. Relief. A steadying of the soul. When I stepped back outside, the sky had begun to clear after a thin morning mist. The mountains looked sharper, the town somehow smaller, and I realized for the first time that grief had stopped pacing inside me. I'd stopped feeding it. 2 days later, a reporter reached out, not from one of the gossip pages covering the wedding spectacle, but a soft-spoken young woman from a local Asheville feature column. She'd heard about the scholarship through the college board, not from rumor. I'd love to highlight the impact on the community, she said. I agreed, but only if she came alone, no camera crew, no theatrics. She arrived with a small notebook and a gentleness you don't often find in people who write for a living. We sat on my porch drinking sweet tea while the afternoon sun drifted between the trees. She asked about Daniel, about my years as a nurse, about why the scholarship mattered now. I didn't mention the wedding, or the disinheritance, or the wounds still healing quietly beneath my ribs. All I said was, legacy is a choice. She wrote it down carefully, like it was more than a sentence. Maybe it was. The article ran 3 days later, a simple piece, tender, honest, a celebration of Daniel's memory, a recognition of the students who needed a hand the way he once had. That afternoon, Jamie appeared on my porch, breathless from jogging, cheeks flushed. The moment he saw me, his face cracked into a smile I hadn't seen since he was a boy earning his first A in biology. You changed my life once, he said, holding up his phone with the article open. You just did it again for people like me. His voice wavered, and for a moment, so did mine. I watched him walk back down the path, and something inside me settled, quiet but certain. Rachel had walked away from the family she was born into, but there were others standing in the space she left behind, filling it with something steadier than blood. That night, as I folded laundry in the living room, my phone buzzed again, the same sender who'd warned me days ago. We need to meet sooner, something changed. A second message followed immediately after. And Margaret, it involves bait. The message about bait sat unread for hours. Not because I was avoiding it, because I needed to face one battlefield at a time. And the next morning, the fallout from the scholarship article had barely settled when a new storm formed on the horizon. It began with an email notification. Then another. Then 3 in a row. All from Rachel. Lauren forwarded them to me without comment. She didn't need to, the subject lines were enough. Urgent estate clarification. Please respond immediately. Can she do this? I could almost hear her voice behind the words, tight, frantic, laced with the disbelief of someone who had always assumed immunity. Lauren didn't respond to any of them. Professionalism wasn't silence. It was boundaries. By midday, Rachel had moved on to another attorney, someone expensive enough to soothe her ego but honest enough not to lie to her. He read the revised will, the notarized documents, the trust transfer, the scholarship designation. It's rock solid, he told her. I didn't need to be in the room to imagine the stunned stillness that followed. Rachel wasn't used to permanence. She had built her adult life on charm and reinvention, on believing she could reshape truth with enough poise and performance. But wills don't bend for theatrics, trusts don't respond to tantrums. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I didn't play it immediately. I finished stirring the pot of soup on the stove, ladled myself a bowl, and sat at the kitchen table. Only then did I press the button. Rachel's voice hit me like a tide, shaky, thin, tortured. Mom, I made a mistake. A sharp inhale. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was overwhelmed. Grant's family, everyone had expectations, and I. Another tremble. Please call me back, please, I'm begging you, I'm still your daughter. I listened without moving. Her tears weren't fake, I could hear the truth in their weight. But they weren't enough. Not anymore. When the message ended, I sat staring at the floorboards, feeling neither triumph nor cruelty, just the quiet ache of recognition. She wasn't apologizing for the wound. Only for the consequences. I pressed delete. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Across town, consequences were meeting her faster than I could imagine. Grant's family, wealthy, careful, curated, began recalibrating their view of her almost immediately. Event invitations disappeared, text threads quieted, dinner plans fell through. They saw what I had finally allowed myself to see. Rachel wanted access to status more than she wanted connection. The following weekend, Grant's parents hosted a small brunch. Rachel arrived with a strained smile, trying to reclaim footing on social ground that no longer belonged to her. Someone, maybe a cousin, maybe a colleague's spouse, lifted their mimosa and joked lightly, "Next time, maybe invite your mother so she won't sue." The table fell into an uneasy chuckle. Grant didn't laugh. Rachel didn't either. It wasn't about a lawsuit. It was about the truth, dressed as a joke. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to get the mail, needing a small moment of fresh air before reading the message about bait. The mountains were quiet, the sky a muted gray, as though the weather itself was waiting for whatever came next. Inside my mailbox, tucked between bills and a grocery flyer, was a thin white envelope addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately. Rachel S. Not elegant, not curated, not printed. Just ink. Urgent. I carried it inside, set it on the table, and stared at it without opening it. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't tremble, I simply felt braced. Before I could reach for it, my phone buzzed again. The same sender who'd warned me before. This time with a single line. Margaret, what bait did goes deeper than the wedding. A second message arrived immediately after, shorter, sharper, impossible to ignore. And Rachel D. Isn't no yet. The envelope from Rachel sat untouched on my dining table, its edges soft from the way I'd carried it inside. The two messages about bait, sharp, ominous, hovered on my phone like a hand on a doorknob I wasn't ready to turn. So I did what I've always done when life threatened to pull me under. I walked the perimeter of my home. This house had never asked anything of me except care, something Rachel once suggested I give up entirely. Too much space for one person, she'd said during her last visit, looking around the living room like she was appraising it for resale. You should start fresh somewhere smaller. I remember nodding then, letting the comment slide past me the way I let too many things slide. But later that night, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. If Rachel saw the house as an asset to inherit or liquidate, not a history to honor, then I needed to act while clarity was still fresh in my chest. I'd had the house reappraised quietly. Lauren recommended a woman who worked discreetly, someone who understood the need for privacy. When the papers came back listing its worth and potential vulnerabilities, I moved it into a private living trust. My name, no contingencies, no future claims. The document was signed, notarized, and filed before the wedding was even announced. Now, as I walked room to room, I felt the protection like a shield, thin but firm, built with intention instead of fear. The porch creaked as I stepped outside. Autumn hovered in the air, crisp and sweet, the mountains holding a stillness I'd come to depend on. A car pulled up the gravel drive, one of the scholarship board members arriving for our second meeting. We'd begun gathering in my home out of convenience. It became something else out of comfort. 6 people now sat around my dining table twice a month, discussing applications, reviewing essays, building the foundation that would carry Daniel's name into the future. They always complimented the warmth of the house. I never told them the truth. This place kept me warm too. That afternoon, after the meeting ended and the committee members drove off, I checked the mailbox as I walked back up the drive. Inside were 2 envelopes, one from the college, another handwritten with shaky cursive. I recognized the name immediately. A former patient, someone I'd cared for during the hardest winter of my career. Her note was short, barely 5 lines. She'd seen the scholarship announcement. She wanted me to know I'd changed her life. Again. The second letter that week. The weight of gratitude can feel heavier than grief. I sat on the porch steps for a long while, reading her words twice, 3 times. Something about those letters, those unexpected returns of kindness, created a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Rachel had walked away from me, but the world I'd served for 40 years was walking back. It was around this time that the suppers started. 3 women from church, Donna, Miriam, and June, each of them uninvited from their own children's weddings for reasons that sounded too familiar. One day after service, we found ourselves standing in the parking lot, sharing pieces of our stories the way people share weather predictions, cautious, testing the wind. I invited them over for dinner the next Friday. One supper became 2, then 4, then planned. We set the table together, cooked simple meals, and laughed like the years were rolling backward. On the 3rd gathering, June raised her glass and said with a wry grin, "To the RSVP Club, women who learned that the guest list doesn't determine our worth." The name stuck. Our dinners became a circle of reclamation, quiet, soft, unhurried. For the first time since Daniel died, I didn't feel like the house echoed, it hummed. When the women left that night and I returned to the now full dining room to clear plates, my phone buzzed again. The same sender. The same urgency. A new message waited on the screen. "Margaret, Bate took something years ago, something Rachel built her resentment on. You deserve to know what it was." A pause. Another message followed, colder. "And she's finally ready to tell you why." The messages about Bate rattled in the back of my mind, but before I could face whatever truth she'd been sitting on for years, something else reached me first, quietly, like gossip that had grown legs. Rachel had changed her name. Not simply taken Grant's. Not kept mine. She dehyphenated it Collins Holly's, a polished compromise designed for cocktail parties and charity galas, a name that sounded expensive, curated, socially acceptable in the circles she'd fought so hard to join. When I saw it printed for the first time on a public registry update, I felt nothing sharp, just a slow, steady cooling like water settling after a long boil. She had cut me out long before I cut her out. The name simply caught up. The next morning, I met Lauren at the courthouse annex. She held the stack of papers I'd asked her to repair, detaching my estate, my trusts, my legal identity from any future claim tied to Rachel's married name. The clerk, an older man with kind eyes but a professional stiffness, reviewed the documents. "You're certain?" he asked, the way people ask when they already know the answer. "Yes," I said. "The Collins name ends with decency, not spectacle." Lauren didn't smile, but I saw the faintest shift in her expression, respect not for the decision itself but for the clarity behind it. She filed the papers with her usual precision, each stamp sealing a boundary that should have been established years ago. Afterwards, she walked me to the parking lot. "You have the scholarship event tonight," she reminded me. "I know." And for once I looked forward to it. The college auditorium glowed softly under warm lighting filled with students, donors, faculty, and the familiar faces of the scholarship committee. The banner at the front read, "The Daniel Collins Nursing Scholarship, honoring a legacy of care." I stood at the podium with my notes folded small in my hand. My heart didn't race, my voice didn't tremble. When I spoke, the words felt as effortless as breathing. "Kindness," I said, "doesn't demand applause. It grows quietly in the places we forget to look." I saw heads nodding, a few students wiped their eyes, someone in the front row squeezed a friend's hand. When the crowd applauded, it felt genuine, not loud, not showy, but real. After the ceremony, people began to drift toward the reception tables, soft chatter filling the room. I was turning to speak with one of the nursing professors when I noticed a figure standing near the back wall, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense, suit wrinkled at the sleeves as if he hadn't bothered to smooth it. "Grant. Alone." He waited until the last conversation ended before approaching, slow and deliberate. His eyes looked tired, older than his wedding photos, stripped of the sheen that wealth often grants. "Mrs. Collins," he said quietly. "Grant." He swallowed, glancing at the banner behind me. "I wish," his voice trailed off before he gathered himself, "I wish I'd met you differently." There was no angle in his tone, no plea, no attempt to rewrite what had already been writ. I nodded. "So do I." We stood there for a moment, two people separated by choices neither of us had made alone, holding the quiet space between truth and regret. Then he exhaled and stepped back. "If you ever want to know the whole story," he said, "I think it's time you heard it." Before I could ask what he meant, someone called his name from across the room. He gave a small nod and left through the side entrance, disappearing into the cool evening air. "The whole story." The words echoed long after he was gone. When I returned home later that night, the house was dark except for the lamp I'd left on in the living room. On the table, Rachel's unopened letter still waited exactly where I'd left it. But beside it, slipped under the door at some point while I was gone, was a second envelope. Thicker, unfamiliar handwriting. No return address. And in the corner, written faintly in pencil, "It's time." The second envelope sat in my hands longer than it should have. The paper was heavier than Rachel's, thick, archival, the kind used for documents meant to outlive the people who sign them. Inside, I found exactly what I expected. And exactly what I wasn't prepared for. A neatly typed letter from Lauren. A final draft. Awaiting only my signature. Full inheritance transfer. Executor authority assigned solely to her. Primary heir Jamie Everett. I read the line 3 times, even though I'd instructed her to prepare it months ago, long before I knew just how deep Bates' interference had cut, or how effortlessly Rachel had accepted a life without me in it. I didn't hesitate. I set the papers on the dining table beside the unopened letter from my daughter, fetched my pen, and signed where Lauren had marked. The legal weight of my signature felt nothing like revenge. It felt like alignment, my life finally lining up with truth instead of obligation. Later that morning, I called Jamie and asked him to stop by after his shift. He showed up still in scrubs, hair mussed under a cap, the faint smell of antiseptic clinging to him the way it used to cling to me after long hospital nights. "Miss Collins," he said, concerned, "you doing okay?" I slid the file across the table. He skimmed the first page, then jerked his head up so fast the chair creaked. "Why me?" His voice cracked, young and bewildered. "Because you showed up," I said simply, "when no one else did." His eyes filled and he shook his head as if he didn't deserve the weight of the pages in front of him. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I told him. Just live well, take care of the people who need you. That's all Daniel ever wanted for this family. He pressed a hand to his face, then reached for mine with the other. Warm, steady, grateful in a way I'd stopped expecting from blood. While Jamie left to sit in his car and breathe, his silhouette curled forward like someone learning how to carry something sacred, Lauren filed the documents. And somewhere across town, Rachel's phone pinged with a notification she never believed would arrive. Formal removal from all future estate matters. No standing. No challenge permitted. I imagined her frozen in place, the letter trembling between manicured fingers, the first time in her life she couldn't charm, curate, or talk her way out of consequence. But fate wasn't finished with her. That same afternoon, Grant walked into their apartment carrying a manila envelope. He didn't say a word when he set it on the kitchen island. Divorce papers. Clean, quiet, uncontested. He didn't need to explain. Rachel already knew. By evening, her social media accounts began to shift, photos disappearing one by one, the rehearsal dinner, the engagement shoot, the wedding album she'd curated so meticulously. In their place, nothing. Blank squares where a life used to be. Back in my own home, I sat once more at the dining table, pen in hand, a lamp casting warm amber light across the wood, ready to write the final clause of a life story I never imagined rewriting. I opened my journal to a fresh page and with calm I'd earned inch by inch wrote. My legacy lives where love did. Not where obligation died. I set the pen down. Clo, said the journal, and let out a breath that felt like it had been waiting years to escape. But peace never stays long in families like mine. As I rose from the table, a car door slammed outside, sharp, hurried. Footsteps crunched up my gravel drive. Then a rapid knock rattled the front door. I froze. Not the gentle knock of a friend. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor. Urgent. Panicked. Familiar. When I opened the door, Rachel stood on my porch, eyes wild, hair unbrushed, cheeks streaked with mascara. Mom, she gasped, barely able to breathe. You don't understand, Bate lied about everything and she's... She broke off, grabbing the doorframe for balance. Mom, she whispered, voice trembling, something's wrong with her. Before I could speak, headlights swung across the yard. Another car pulling in fast. Bate. Birthdays stop mattering after a certain age, at least that's what I used to say. But this year, as dawn settled gently over the mountains and light pooled across my kitchen floor, I felt something different humming under my ribs. A quiet fullness. A steadiness that didn't depend on who showed up, but on who stayed. The chaos from the night Rachel arrived on my porch, her shaking hands, Bates' headlights cutting through the dark, still lived somewhere in my memory like a bruise waiting to bloom. The truth Bate confessed that night was its own storm, one I was still learning how to walk through. But today wasn't for storms. Today was mine. By late afternoon, my house, once echoing, once too large for a single person, felt lived in again. The porch railings were lined with mason jars of wildflowers. A long table stretched across the dining room, draped in the checkered cloth Daniel and I bought on our 10th anniversary trip to Boone. The RSVP club had insisted on coming early to help set up. Donna brought her famous cornbread, Miriam arrived with a pot of chili, and June, despite her knees, stood on a chair to hang string lights across the hallway. One by one, people filtered in. Former patients. Scholarship board members. Neighbors who'd watched Rachel grow up and watched her drift away. And Jamie, carrying an armful of wrapped packages and looking both sheepish and proud. It wasn't a big gathering, not compared to the wedding I'd been erased from, but it felt complete in a way no ballroom ever could. The cake was homemade, 2 layers, slightly crooked, frosted with buttercream that leaned too heavily to one side. I'd baked it that morning, feeling strangely giddy as I grated lemon zest into the batter. On the entry table, beside the stack of mismatched plates, sat a simple guest book. Only one line was written inside. You are still welcome here. No signature, no explanation, just the truth I wanted anyone who walked through my door to understand. As the house filled with chatter and soft music from my old radio, Lauren arrived. She didn't linger in the doorway the way she usually did. She stepped in quickly, scanning the room like she was checking the structural integrity of a foundation she'd helped pour. "Happy birthday," she said, handing me an envelope. "Final confirmations, everything's protected now." Her tone carried that lawyerly mixture of pride and caution, but beneath it I heard something else, relief. As if she'd been holding her breath through every twist of the last few months and could finally exhale. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more deeply than she knew. After dinner, when the room had settled into that warm lull that follows shared meals and low laughter, I pulled out a thin booklet from my desk drawer. A short story I'd written years ago, back when Rachel was still small enough to fall asleep in the backseat on long drives, back when motherhood felt like a road winding forward instead of one fracturing behind me. I read aloud the last page. A quiet little piece about a mother learning that love doesn't end when the child walks away, it simply grows roots elsewhere. When I finished, no one clapped. They didn't need to. Silence can be its own form of reverence. Jamie stood then, clearing his throat as if preparing for a speech he hadn't planned to give. "I got you something," he said, tugging awkwardly at the ribbon around a wooden frame. Inside was a photo. A young woman in a graduation cap and gown, tears shining in her eyes, clutching her nursing degree in both hands. "The scholarship's first recipient," he said softly. "She wants to meet you someday." Something inside me cracked, not painfully but gently, like a shell giving way. Tears slipped before I could stop them. Jamie blinked fast, a hint that he was fighting his own. We cried together, quietly, without bitterness, without apology. The room blurred for a moment, filled with the hum of lives that had intertwined with mine, not because of blood, but because of choice, the kind of choice Rachel had never understood. When the last guests left and I stood alone in the doorway waving them into the night, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Home. Not the house. The feeling. I turned to blow out the candles, but before I could, a shadow moved past the kitchen window. Then, a knock. Soft. Measured. Not frantic like Rachel S., not demanding like Bates. I stepped toward the door, dish towel still in my hand. When I opened it, the porch light fell across a face I hadn't seen since before the wedding, drawn, older, marked by regret. "Grant." "Mrs. Collins," he said quietly, "I think it's time you finally heard the rest." The morning of Rachel and Grant's one-year anniversary arrived the way most truths do, quietly, without ceremony. I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in blue-gray dawn, and lay there for a moment listening to the soft tick of the hall clock. A year ago, that same clock had marked the hours of a wedding I wasn't invited to, a union already unraveling before the ink dried on their certificates. Now the date meant something different. Something lighter. Something I didn't need to track. I didn't check social media. I didn't check the local pages. I didn't check to see whether Rachel and Grant were still legally attached or if their lives had finally split cleanly down the middle. Instead, I pushed back the blankets, tied my robe, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of last night's lemon candles. I opened the pantry, pulled down flour and sugar, and began measuring ingredients for scones, blueberry and almond, Jamie's favorite. Today was his nursing graduation brunch. Today was about beginnings, not endings. As I mixed the dough, sunlight slowly filled the kitchen, casting long beams across the counter. My hands moved without thinking, cutting butter, folding berries into the mixture, shaping the discs the way Daniel used to like them on holidays. The rhythm soothed me, anchored me. The oven warmed the house, wrapping it in a comfort I hadn't felt on this date in years. When the timer beeped, I slid the tray out, steam curling upward like a gentle blessing. Right on cue, a soft knock sounded at the front door. Lauren stood on the porch, hair pulled into her usual low twist, a leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm. She smiled, not the tight, professional one she wore to court, but the gentler version she saved for moments she knew mattered. Final estate copies, she said, everything officially closed. She handed me the folder but didn't step back. Instead, she studied me for a moment, her eyes warming. You're more loved than you know, Margaret. I felt the words settle into me, slow and steady. Some days, I said softly, I finally believe that. She squeezed my shoulder before heading down the steps, leaving me alone with the scones cooling on the counter and a piece I'd earned inch by inch. Before getting ready for the brunch, I slipped outside to walk the property line, a habit I'd developed in the months after the wedding. The morning air was crisp, filled with birdsong and the faint hum of distant traffic. The maples rustled overhead, their leaves filtering sunlight in little flickers. I hummed as I walked. Not any particular song, just a melody my mother used to hum while kneading bread. A simple, steady tune that carried me like a hand at my back. This land had held me through marriage, through motherhood, through grief, through the quiet dismantling and rebuilding of my life. I traced the fence with my fingertips and whispered a thank you to no one and everyone. By the time I arrived at the community center where Jamie's celebration was being held, the parking lot was already lined with cars. Inside, balloons bobbed near the ceiling and tables overflowed with casseroles and congratulatory cards. Jamie stood near the stage, flushed with pride and overwhelmed attention. He spotted me and broke into a grin so wide it softened every line of my worries. During brunch, someone, an older nurse I hadn't seen in years, touched my arm gently. Do you miss her? She asked, not unkindly. No judgment. Just human curiosity. I didn't look away. I miss who she was, I said, not who she chose to be. The woman nodded slowly, as if the answer was one she'd learned herself a long time ago. Hours later, after hugs and photos and speeches, the guests began to drift toward the doors. Jamie hugged me last, whispering, "None of this would have happened without you." When the room finally emptied, I placed the estate folder Lauren had delivered into a drawer labeled Legacy, the same drawer where Daniel once kept every bill, every tax paper, every carefully written note about our future. The drawer slid shut with a quiet finality. I stood there a moment, letting the weight of the year settle in layers: grief, clarity, rebuilding, release. Then I stepped outside, breathing in the mountain air that had carried me from the start. I wasn't invited to my daughter's wedding, but I had rewritten what it means to be family. And I had kept my seat at the table. I wasn't invited to my daughter's wedding, but I rewrote what it means to be family, and I kept my seat at the table.